In the mid-2000s, comic book films were largely becoming accepted as massive box office draws that had the potential to make or break an actor's career. Ben Affleck was trying to distance himself from his role as Matt Murdock in the critically panned Daredevil, Tobey Maguire was hanging up his Spidey suit for seemingly forever, and even Chris Evans was scarred from his role as Johnny Storm in the disappointing Fantastic Four series. And before we saw Affleck don the mantle of the world's greatest detective, before we saw Tobey swing his way back into the spotlight, and even before Chris Evans would secure his role as one of the most iconic superheroes of all time, Marvel was seriously in need of some movie maintenance.
I do anything and everything that Mr. Stark requires, including occasionally taking out the trash.
See, with the superhero movie genre being the new it trend in Hollywood since the early millennium, every studio in town was looking for usable comic book IP to adapt to live action. This includes studios like Fox producing a large gallery of X-Men flicks, and Sony trying to capitalize on the goldmine of Spider-Man material. But what about the company that created all of these colorful crusaders? What about Marvel?
You really think that just because you have an idea, it belongs to you?
For those that don't know, Marvel wasn't always a multi-billion-dollar corporation with endless resources and Mickey writing the checks. In fact, Marvel was in such dire financial straits at the time that they resorted to selling their IP film rights to various studios. This is, of course, how all of the Marvel films we got up until this point were made. Marvel would sell a popular IP to the highest bidding movie studio, and that studio would then make their movie, for better or worse, and collect millions of dollars. And for the uninitiated, movies generate much more money than comics, and Marvel wanted in on some of that sweet dough. Now, because Marvel had previously sold all of their best-selling characters to multiple different studios, they themselves were not left with the film rights to characters that were easily known to non-comic book readers.
I think it's incredibly overpriced.
I need it. Buy it, store it.
At this time in the mid-2000s, the public wasn't hip to the world of superhero content. This was a time where Guardians of the Galaxy were not a household name, and nobody knew or cared to know anything about characters like Vision, Falcon, or Captain Marvel. It's really hard to imagine now, but Marvel was struggling to find the right path to take for their own live-action comic book movies. But then, one character, one decision, one giant risk led to the most successful and widely known comic book franchise of all time, the MCU.
Mr. Stark, you've become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet.
But how did we get here? Well, true believers, it all started with a movie that nobody saw coming. A movie that serves as the starting point for the entire MCU. A movie that, had just one thing gone differently, would have been nothing more than another failed experiment in Marvel movies. And that movie is 2008's And of course, the big question today is, how does this movie hold up 15 years later? Let's find out in today's episode of Marvel Revisited. Iron Man was directed by Jon Favreau and stars Robert Downey Jr., Jeff Bridges, Terrence Howard, and Gwyneth Paltrow. It's the origin story of Tony Stark as Iron Man. Tony is an egocentric billionaire weapons dealer with a love for fast women and good times. But when Tony is kidnapped and nearly fatally injured by a terrorist organization, he builds a suit to keep himself safe while being a total threat to anyone outside the suit. But will this invention save Tony's life or put a target on his back for the greedy Obadiah Stane, Tony's second in command, who aims to kill Tony and sell the Iron Man technology?
Let me have the engineers analyze that, draw up some specs.
No.
Now, if you didn't know, Iron Man was created in 1963 by Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, Larry Lieber, Don Heck, and Jack Kirby. He made his first appearance in the science fiction comic book series Tales of Suspense, but 5 years later got his own comic book series. The film was a wild card for Marvel. This character wasn't necessarily a bestseller. In fact, at the time, he was a mostly unknown character to anybody that wasn't interested in comics. But Jon Favreau had a vision for the character and an angle to introduce this new kind of hero to the cinema. At one point in the late 90s, there were talks and some development on a live-action Iron Man film that was set to star Tom Cruise as Tony Stark. And Cruise was considered for years, even into this production. The role of Iron Man ended up going to newly sober Robert Downey Jr., who had previously been forgotten by Hollywood after a history of drug use and other legal issues. And to this day, Iron Man serves as the movie responsible for Downey Jr.'s big comeback. I mean, for real, this movie is directly responsible for Robert Downey Jr. becoming the highest paid actor in Hollywood at one point. You might say he was no longer less than zero. You know what I mean?
No.
So when this movie was made, nobody knew it would lead to the greater MCU as we have it today. But that was always the goal. While this movie stands as a kick-ass and punk rock action adventure on its own, it's also the movie that planted the first seed for the Avengers. According to Jeff Bridges, there was no official finished script for this film. This means that any Easter eggs for the greater MCU were thought up and added to the movie as they were filming. Marvel had faith in Jon Favreau as a filmmaker and knew that if this movie went well, there would be other characters being introduced in their own movies that would eventually cross over into one revolutionary film. And to kick off that revolution, we were given Tony Stark.
Is it better to be feared or respected? And I say, is it too much to ask for both?
Tony is the CEO of Stark Tech, which produces military-grade weapons for the government. Tony inherited this business from his late father, Howard Stark, who we don't learn much about in this movie, but we do get the full Howard Stark treatment across later films. Tony is more than just a spoiled young billionaire, though. He's also a literal genius. He's a brilliant engineer with money and resources to help fund his appetite for creating new defense tech. And I like the way this movie is paced in general, but I really love how quick we get into the good stuff in the first act.
Wait, give me a gun! Here!
We're quickly introduced to Tony, and we're flooded with context clues to tell us what kind of person he really is. He's drinking, partying with strangers, and seemingly unconcerned with his responsibilities. But he's also charming and quick-witted in a way that makes us like him right from the very start.
Please, no gang signs. No, throw it up, I'm kidding.
We also meet his BFF, James Rhodey Rhodes, played here by Terrence Howard, but later replaced by Don Cheadle, who continues to play the role. Rhodey is a high-ranking military official, and he's presented as the more mature of the two friends.
You don't respect yourself, so I know you don't respect me.
I respect
I'm just your babysitter, and so, you know, when you need your diaper change.
Now, early on in the movie, Tony is captured by foreign terrorists who want Tony to build them a nuclear weapon. While in captivity, Tony meets Yinsen, a fellow prisoner who saves Tony's life when a piece of shrapnel is lodged in his heart. This is where we get some good character development for Tony. Yinsen brings out some of his humanity and helps him realize that selling these weapons makes Tony responsible for war. Tony has a bit of a moral awakening, and it's not even halfway into the movie, but it's believable. This is some damn good character work. You might say it's a real character arc. You know what I mean? So instead of building his captors a weapon, Tony makes the Mark I version of his suit. Unfortunately, this is the end of the line for Yinsen.
Thank you for saving me. Don't waste it.
So now Tony is fully committed to his survival at this point, and he is ready to break out, and the Iron Man is born.
My turn.
This suit design looks incredible, and it's a perfect homage to the original design of the Iron Man suit in the comics. I love it. Tony escapes captivity, but just barely. His suit gets him past the bad guys, but it can't take him all the way home. But Tony is saved by the US military, and he makes it back home to Malibu. With Tony having the experience that he had, he comes home a new man. He decides that his company is no longer going to create weapons, but resources. Tony wants to rebrand and truly do something that makes a difference for the good, and when he reveals this at a press conference, it kicks off the beginning of old Obadiah Stane's plan to take Tony out so that he doesn't lose control of the company, which he gained while Tony was in captivity. This movie really is punk rock. The soundtrack has some heavy hitters on it, such as Institutionalized by the Suicidal Tendencies, and a ripping score by Raymond Djwani and Hans Zimmer. I believe that Tom Morello, the guitarist from Rage Against the Machine, also did some of the score, and he has a cameo in the movie, and it rules. Now, these days seeing Iron Man suit up is par for the course. He can just tap a button on his arc reactor and the CGI nanotech does the rest. But seeing Tony slip into his first proper Iron Man suit in this movie still gives me chills. The filming for Tony's first suit up and his entire testing montage was mostly done practically with less digital effects than we end up seeing later in the MCU. I'd say this is one of the best and most memorable montages across the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. We get to feel like we are part of the crew building this incredible sequence and the even more incredible payoff.
Jarvis, sometimes you gotta run before you can walk.
We also see that Tony has his eye on the terrorist that kidnapped him, while also growing closer to his assistant, Pepper Potts, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, who we later know to be the Iron Woman and the mother of Tony's daughter. Again, these are little qualities that make the movie shine, and it still feels fun and exciting. Tony's first flight is quite the spectacle. Jon Favreau made the genius decision to get a shot from inside the suit with Tony. I love the immersive feeling of seeing Iron Man fly in this movie, and adding a reverse POV shot makes us feel like we are in Tony's helmet. And then it'll cut to the wide shots immediately to put us back on the ground looking up, and it is so much fun. I miss being this excited.
Yeah, I can fly.
So, Tony gets his revenge on his kidnappers, which is an amazing scene, but meanwhile, old Obi is having Ralphie from A Christmas Story attempt to build a new version of Tony's arc reactor. You know the one.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
But eventually, Obi meets with Tony's surviving captors and gets the information that he needs. And I'm not a huge fan of the villainy that we do get in this movie, but I want to be clear. I love Jeff Bridges. I just don't love the Ironmonger idea. So, Obi nearly kills Tony by putting some frequency blaster in his ear, and it makes for a rather disturbing visual. And up until this point in the movie, I'm loving everything I'm getting. I think the visual effects of this movie will prove to be absolutely timeless. After seeing Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, Favreau hired Industrial Light and Magic to work on the visual effects. Great idea. When you compare the visuals in this movie to something like Daredevil, which we recently covered, the VFX are much sharper here and more detailed in this movie. Personally, I think it even looks better than much of the CGI and visual effects that Marvel is producing today. Is that even a hot take anymore?
It's an imperfect world, but it's the only one we've got.
So, the final conflict, to me, is underwhelming. I respect the incredible achievement that this movie even exists. I think it has amazing writing, inspired direction, and a very stylish visual language. But it's kind of like watching a robot get beat up by a slightly bigger robot on a dark rooftop. There's some villainous dialogue from Obi and some heroic dialogue from Tony, and just when you think Tony is toast, he reminds Obi why he's in charge and outsmarts him.
And now, I'm gonna kill you with it.
It's fine, like, it's not bad. I just find this final act to be a bit of a letdown to the amazing momentum built in the first half. But I do love this teaser for War Machine right here.
Next time, baby.
Oh, the irony. Plain and simple, Iron Man is one of those movies that just stands out. It's colorful, it's got flair, it's visually dazzling, witty, rugged, and fucking intense. It was just the breakout success that Marvel needed in order to continue building out their universe. And this is proved by a post-credit scene that shows Nick Fury approach Tony for a special project. A project intended to defend Earth from any threats too big for the military. A project called the Avengers Initiative.
I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
If you love comics, or if you love movies, or if you love comic book movies, Iron Man is a movie for everyone. Following the success of this movie's $585 million box office run, Marvel began scouting for potential stars and unknown actors to bring their other, at the time, more obscure characters to life. Since Iron Man's release, we've seen some forgettable features like The Incredible Hulk starring Edward Norton, but also some incredibly memorable movies like the Guardians trilogy. But it would be impossible to praise any of Marvel's work since 2008 without tipping your hat to this iconic starting point.
Let's face it, this is not the worst thing you've caught me doing.
From JoBlo Originals, you've been a wonderful audience, and I
am Iron Man.
Love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up. So